Military Broadcast Radio, the station that's giving veterans a voice.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
This entire military is one cohesive, dedicated force. And the threats to our nations, they don't sleep. They're watching our every move. Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. They may be watching this right now. Our military should not be mistaken for a cable news gabfest show. We don't care what you look like. We don't care who you voted for, who you worship, what you worship, who you love. It doesn't matter if your dad left you millions when he died or if you knew who your father was. We have been honed into a machine of lethal moving parts that you would be wise to avoid if you know what's good for you. We will not be intimidated. We will not back down. We've seen war. We don't want war. But if you want war with the United States of America, there's one thing I can promise you, so help me God. Someone else will raise your sons and daughters.
Opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Military Broadcast Radio, the station that's giving veterans a voice.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Join Terry with Tracer Rounds every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central to hear interviews with veteran artists, veteran business owners, and businesses that support veterans. Tune in to see if you're on target. Catch us on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and MB Radio, giving veterans a voice. The interview of the week is brought to you by Jersey Mike's, a sub above.
Welcome to Tracer Rounds, and I'm your host, Terry, and you're on MBR, where we're giving veterans a voice. And tonight's voice is to author Robert B. O'Connor, and he is the author of Show A Trouper, A Trouper at the Battle of the Bulge. And so it's a really interesting read so far. I've not gotten all the way through it, and so I'm going to let our guest talk about it. But welcome, Robert. I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thanks. It's really an honor to be here, talk to you and your audience.
So I know you have some military service in your family. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your relatives, your dad
Yes.
and uncle that were in the service?
Both my grandfathers were in World War I, if you can believe that. Apparently, people in my family wait a long time to have children. My father, Robert, and his younger brother, George, both served overseas in World War II. My father in the Army, and my uncle George in the Navy in the Pacific. Interestingly, neither my father nor my uncle talked about their service during the war or talked about the war. I think that part of it was, they and 16 million other men were served. And so, it wasn't some unusual special thing that, they had served. And then secondly, unfortunately, I never asked them about it.
So is there anybody that still would know anything about their service and what they did, or are all those people passed by now?
Let's see. I think one of my cousins probably has more detail about my uncle's service in the Navy. But as far as my dad, I do have his flight book. He was training to be a pilot in World War II. And so I've got his flight book. He was, some of your Air Force veterans will know the official term. I'll just say he was bounced from pilot training because he was very nearsighted. So we've got some things, but unfortunately, my dad and my uncle are not around now that I've written a book about World War II and I'm full of questions and observations. They're not around.
So how did you get interested in writing in general? Where did that come from?
I think I was born with a modest gift for writing. And I was certainly born with a vivid imagination. And did not do creative writing even in my college years. And then was in the marketing trade, my profession. So I did a fair amount of advertising copywriting, which is creative writing, of course, and excellent training. Yeah. And then about 15 years or so now, life hit me in the face with a 2x4, and I spent about a month being, just super depressed and super down. And while I was doing that, I still had to go to work. So while I was at work, I started a journal about, the stupid decisions I'd made that got me into this position and how I might get out of it, and some advice that I was hearing. And I got better, and I kept at it, ended up turning that into a nonfiction book called Gumption Aid. So I learned the process of writing a book, which was somewhat painful.
I bet.
And Gumption Aid did very well. There's a huge market for self-help books.
Yes.
And I was going to move on and write a nonfiction book about a circus. And I was researching a certain circus promoter, a gentleman named Jim Hetzer. Mm-hmm. And I managed to Jim Hetzer, like many World War II veterans, is gone. Yeah. And I managed to track down his daughter. And she was very gracious, and she told me about his career as a circus promoter and, starting out as a clown in the circus and interesting things. And then she said, but you probably don't know that my dad was an enlisted entertainer in World War II. And I said, well, of course, I didn't know that about your dad, but more importantly, I didn't know there were enlisted entertainers in World War II. Was this some kind of USO thing? And she said, no. These were, USO was civilian. These were enlisted men, MOS 442, entertainment specialists. And they had two jobs over in the European theater. One was in the rear echelon to put on amateur shows using soldiers for the cast and the crew, essentially to fight boredom. But their important job, she said, was doing Jeep shows. 3 of these enlisted entertainers would jump in a Jeep and they would drive to just behind the front lines where the combat infantry would be brought back for a hot meal, possibly a uniform exchange. And they would jump out of the Jeep and do essentially a vaudeville show almost. One of them would have an instrument, often an accordion or a guitar, and they would sing songs and they would dance. And of course, they told jokes and did routines. And Terry, they would always try to pull a soldier out of the audience, because his buddies would be like, hey, Bill does impressions, and of course, Bill would be terrible, but it was, in some ways, it was the highlight of the show. So they always tried to do that. So I found out about this actual person, Jim Hetzer, that was enlisted in the Army and he had actually wanted to be a paratrooper, but when they found out about his show business background, they made him a morale corps soldier. And his Jeep show crew, his 3-man crew, was led by Mickey Rooney.
That's crazy.
Now, for your younger veterans, I have to tell you, Mickey Rooney was the worldwide #1 box office Hollywood box office sensation of 1939. He was a huge star.
Yes, he was.
He was also considered, he could do anything. He was an excellent actor. He was a super funny comedian. He could do slapstick. He could do impressions. He played the drums at a professional level.
It's crazy.
But, he was a genius. Where there are great strengths, Terry, there are corresponding weaknesses. And
Yes.
his private life was completely out of control.
I can only imagine.
He was married to Ava Gardner, who is was the most beautiful woman in Hollywood, and he cheated on her. He used to roll into movie sets of other movies with his posse, just living this wild personal life. Well,
yeah.
Mickey Rooney got enlisted in the Army in late 1943. He was feeling some public pressure to do that, but my theory is he wanted to get away from Hollywood, because it was killing him. And he could have served his military time in Beverly Hills at Hal Roach Studios doing movies for the Signal Corps, but he chose to go overseas and be in this action. So I found out about this real person, Jim Hetzer, who had been an entertainment soldier in World War II and had been in Mickey Rooney's Jeep Show squad. And I found out that Jim Hetzer's older sister had saved every letter Jim wrote home from training camp and the war. So I had 100 some odd primary source letters describing what life was like in training camp at Camp Siebert, which is no longer in operations, and then going over to Europe and then being in Europe. I decided to make it fiction because, first of all, I just wanted to write fiction. But secondly, I wanted to involve the main character in the Battle of the Bulge. Because the Battle of the Bulge, of course, very significant, the largest battle ever fought by the U.S. Army, a real turning point in the war in the West, kind of a last gasp by Hitler's army. And so I decided to make the whole thing fiction. It's inspired by the life of this real person, but because I made it fiction, I got to do a lot of things, got to put my character in a lot of things that kind of try to tell a complete story of what it might have been like for a soldier, an enlisted man on the ground in the European theater of operations in 1944 and 1945. So, of course, Jim is doing Jeep shows with Mickey Rooney. Of course, he came through London and he came through Paris before they sent him to the front, like so many soldiers. And then he is caught up in the Battle of the Bulge. He makes kind of a stumbling, fighting retreat to Bastogne, where he and other survivors are organized into a irregular unit called Team Snafu, situation normal, all effed up. And they were deployed in real service, combat and combat support for the famous 101st Airborne. And of course, we all know about the gallant 101st Airborne, but the exploits of Team Snafu have been lost to time. So I wanted to have him in that battle, have him in Bastogne, and have him be part of Team Snafu, a real unit. And then he, again, because I could put him anywhere I wanted to, he is present at a reception given by General Omar Bradley for a preeminent Russian general, and he and Mickey Rooney perform at that reception. And then I have him present at the liberation of Ohrdruf, which was a satellite German concentration camp, because I want readers who aren't familiar with what American soldiers saw in liberating those camps. I want them to read about it in this story. And then he ends up in occupied Germany, as my father did, and so many other soldiers who didn't have enough points to get home right after the war. He ends up in, so, one of the main benefits of fiction was, even though I've tried to be scrupulously accurate with the big picture, what's going on day to day, what's happening, as long as I'm scrupulously accurate with the big picture, I can take this character and put him in all sorts of situations. So that's my writing story, Terry.
Well, that's a pretty awesome story. I love how you intertwine actual events with your character so that, like you say, he can be a fly on the wall or he can be boots on the ground to show others, what it was really like, what that environment was like, what was happening. That's kind of a good way to tell the story. With just adding that fictional piece, but then telling real events. I mean,
I wanted, awesome. One of my goals is to have people who aren't interested in reading history, nonfiction history, learn about these events, these extraordinary events, and these extraordinary soldiers with a story. Yeah. I will also tell you something I learned along the way. It's very helpful when you're trying to get across the big picture facts in a novel. You really want to avoid just telling the readers what happened, because it gets boring and they skip ahead. But what you have to do is you have to create a character who needs everything explained to him, and thus the audience, the readers, can get the explanation at the same time. And I created kind of the opposite. I created a character called the war correspondent, or as they said in World War II, the Warco. And the Warco runs into Jim Tanzer, the main character, in Bastogne. And so, in a mess hall or somewhere like that. And so the Warco is able to answer Jim's 30,000-foot questions about the defense of Bastogne and how General McAuliffe was the artillery officer of the 101st, and how he used artillery during the battle to hold off the Germans. And so that's a very helpful trick to get across facts to people that are really just interested in reading a story.
Right. They want something that they can resonate with, and not necessarily like, okay, this is the facts. Here's the timeline. They'd rather read something more entertaining. I agree.
Exactly.
We're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. So we're going to play Dustin Garner, Brother in Arms. And then we're also going to put out an Amber Alert that came across as soon as we come back. So we'll be right back. Don't go away.
On the front lines we stand, side by side, with courage and strength that we won't let slide. Through the chaos, our hearts beat as one. Each brother's a soldier, into battle we run. When the shots ring out, we won't back down. In the silence of loss, we'll wear our crown. We are soldiers, brothers in arms. Through fire and fury, we weather the storms. In unity, forged through the blood that we've shed. Together we stand, living for the dead. Each step we take through the mud and the pain, memories linger like the echoes of rain. We fight for the fallen, our spirit won't break. In honor we carry their names in our wake. Though the cost is high, our bonds grow tight. In the darkest of hours will shine our light. We are soldiers, brothers in arms. Through fire and fury, we weather the storms. In unity, forged through the blood that we've shed. Together we stand,
Military Broadcast Radio, the station that's giving veterans a voice.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
And welcome back to Tracer Rounds, and you're on NBR, where we're giving veterans a voice. And tonight's voice is to Robert O'Connor, and he is the author of Jeep Show. So we kind of left off with the character inserting in different timelines across the Battle of the Bulge. So kind of pick up, I guess, at the 101st when he met up with them, and then kind of maybe what happened when his Jeep Show troop was inserted there with them.
Sure. Well, I'll start with this. By fall of 1944, the American Army was essentially on the German border. They had kind of out-advanced their supply route. We've all heard of the Red Ball Express, but they had kind of out-advanced their supply route. So it was intended that they would stay there, regroup, take on replacements, the divisions there, spread fairly thinly on the German border across from Belgium and Luxembourg and a little bit of Holland. So there were company-sized strongpoints all along this border, and Jeep shows were done. The enlisted entertainers would drive up the border. They probably do 3 or 4 shows in a day, just moving north or south along the border. And although there wasn't much active fighting, there were patrols and some snipers, but it was a fairly calm area. Again, because I could, as long as I stuck to the facts of what happened, I could do things with my protagonist. He gets left in a little town in Luxembourg called Hosingen. And Hosingen was actually where Company K of the 28th Division was based in December of 1944. So the protagonist gets left. They need to use his seat on the Jeep to evacuate a wounded soldier. And he gets left in Hosingen, and things are calm. And he wakes up the next morning to the sound of German artillery, and it's December 16th, and the Germans are streaming up the hill in front of. There's about a mile to the German border. It's all uphill, and German Volksgrenadiers are streaming up that hill and heading towards Hosingen. So Jim ends up retreating, and as I plotted his retreat, I researched actual battles that happened in the middle. It was about a 90-mile front, Tracy, when the Germans attacked. And the American Army, not necessarily the lieutenants on the ground, but in general, the Americans were completely taken by surprise. Some of the frontline soldiers and officers had some idea that there was a buildup going on, but the brass never tumbled to that. So in the only place the Americans fought incredibly well, given the surprise, and really completely held up the Germans in the northern shoulder and the southern shoulder. But the Germans made a lot of progress for a few days in the middle. And in the middle is right where I stuck my character, right? And Hosingen is right in the middle of that 90-mile line. So I researched what some of the battles were in that middle as the Germans made great progress for 3 or 4 days. There was regimental headquarters was a few miles back in a town called Clairvaux. And so, and there was a battle of Clairvaux. So Jim retreats to Clairvaux and gets caught up in the chaos and the confusion and other things in Clairvaux. He then from there, and by the way, he picks up a captured German map, and he's supposed to be delivering this, back to Bastogne. Yes. he retreats from Clairvaux to essentially a crossroads called Antonio Shaft. And basically what happened is a task force was set up to that crossroads from the west with no idea that they would be able to stop the Germans or defeat the German thrust, but simply to buy 8 or 9 hours so that the famous 101st and some artillery units had time to get into Bastogne. So Jim participates for a while in this firefight at Antonio Shaft. He then retreats to a village called Longvilly. Again, Longvilly is overrun. He then walks his way into Bastogne, and when to Bastogne, he is immediately put into Team Snafu. And Team Snafu, as we said earlier, is and actually was at Bastogne employed in both combat support and actual combat roles, supporting the 101st. So I wanted to, while I've made up this character, his adventures follow the actual timeline and the actual battles that happened in the middle of the Bulge. And that's why it's called the Battle of the Bulges. The Germans made a bulge in the middle of the American lines. By the way, I don't want to forget, going back to writing, for me, and I think for many writers of historical fiction, research is fun and writing is hard. So it's very easy to procrastinate by doing tons and tons of research. And it's so interesting, Terry.
It is. I agree.
I dramatically over-researched this, but the only good part about that is I have lots of Easter egg, hidden details and Easter eggs in the book, which World War II buffs, and there's a lot of World War II buffs, by the way.
I'm sure, yes.
They just get such a kick out of discovering. So related to the title of your show, I made sure that in the battles, when tracer rounds are fired, the American tracer rounds are orangey red, and the German tracer rounds are green.
Really?
Which was the actual, yes, these were machine gun. This was machine gun rounds.
Yes.
The Germans were actually green. So, I just put that, since because I'd looked up that and many, many, many other details, I stuck that in, and it's something that World War II buffs really get a kick out of. And by the way, I've made presentations at the World War II Museum in New Orleans and some other places, and met many historians who specialize in World War II.
Yes.
Not one of them is aware of MOS 442 entertainment soldiers or Jeep shows. So really? I have rediscovered something that apparently was forgotten to history.
Apparently it was. I mean, I had to Google it too, and I had found where they had renamed that 442 to 03 Bravo.
03 Bravo. Yeah. That must have been after the Korean War.
I think so. I think it was quite a ways removed from the 442 Jeep shows, for sure.
Yeah. Another detail I put in, and I'm sure with your Army service, you've heard of this. There was a condition in World War II that newer soldiers developed. It was called M1 thumb. And when you loaded, the M1 Garand took a clip of 9 rounds. Well, you jammed, you opened the bolt and jammed the clip in. And as soon as the clip got seated, the bolt would fly back with great force. And if your thumb happened to be, in the way of that bolt, you would get a bruise that would last for about 4 months. So I had the main character, without mentioning M1, Garand thumb, I had the main character in training look down at his bruised thumb and think, I do not love my M1 Garand rifle.
Right. Yeah. M16 has kicked me in the face 1 or 2 times.
Oh, yeah. Different.
Yeah. I've gotten pinched in a few my fingers and gotten a black eye and whatnot from not holding the rifle hard enough and not pulling it into my shoulder. And it's kicked back and caught me a couple times. I learned my lesson real quick.
Yes, I was going to say that happens about once, and I'm sure. Yes, and I'm sure some of the veteran soldiers are watching and laughing and remembering when they got hit in the nose.
Right. Yeah, they don't play. If you don't hold them the right way, they're going to kick back, and you're going to know. You're going to know you just sent something downrange for sure.
Yeah,
definitely. Well, that's interesting about the tracers. I didn't know that. So I guess that would make it easy to determine friendly fire from enemy fire. If you're seeing the tracers, you know who's firing what.
Yes. And I think the other thing, and again, some of your listeners who are veterans will know better than I do, but I believe that you alternated your tracer rounds, maybe every, I don't know if it was a machine, every 5th or every 10th round, because even though the tracer was good, so you could see where your rounds were going, the enemy could also see where the rounds were coming from. Yes. So I'm sure you had to be very careful with your tracer rounds.
And they got really hot too. So firing a lot of tracers through your weapon.
I hadn't thought about that. Really they would be burning. Yeah, it wouldn't just be the gas; they'd be burning. Yeah.
Right. Good point. Well, we were firing one time on the rifle range, and we set a range fire with the tracers.
That's what they're supposed to do.
Right. So, we had to call in the fire department to put that out.
Excellent. I'm sure there were high fives all around.
Right. We're like, we did it. But it was really hot, and it was summer, and all the grass was dry, and the tracer decided it was needing to start a fire. So it did.
Oh, man. Good story.
So take us through some more of the book and where he ends up through the battles. And in the Battle of the Bulge, it was saying there was something like 79,000 soldiers that lost their lives during the Battle of the Bulge.
Let's see. Let me consult my Battle of the Bulge. American casualties were 89,000.
89.
And I have it, my sources have it at 19,000 killed. Wow. 47,000 wounded, 23,000 missing or captured. German losses were larger, 100,000 casualties killed, wounded, and captured. So it was, it was an epic battle and a terrible battle. And the book gives some, obviously, nobody in their right mind would glorify war. And the book, I want to show what it was like for an entertainment soldier turned infantry soldier who was on the ground in all that confusion and chaos and danger. But there's in no way do I want to, glorify that or romanticize it, because it was horrible. And not only, horrible in terms of chaos and confusion and wounds and death, but by about the third day, it turned extremely cold. Actually, on the 16th, when the attack started, it was more like, somewhat cold and rainy, but by about the third or fourth day, it turned extremely cold. There was, feet of snow on the ground. And so, as infantry soldiers in combat situations are sleeping outside. They're outside 24/7. So not only did the soldiers, at the front have to deal with all the terrible things about active combat, but they had to deal with just incredibly cold, uncomfortable weather. And one of the things I learned is a lot of the best, warmest clothing never makes it out of the rear echelon. Now, Terry, you can tell me if this is still true or not, but a lot of the warmest, best stuff never quite gets to the combat. They get plenty of ammunition, right? But the best food and the best clothing just kind of never makes it there. So, and I tried to portray just how trying, just how difficult that was. And of course, it was difficult for the German soldiers, the German enlisted soldiers on the other side. I want to go back and talk a little bit more about these enlisted entertainers. We mentioned that the world famous Mickey Rooney was an enlisted entertainer and did Jeep shows, but there's some other names your older veteran listeners might recognize. Mel Brooks.
Mel Brooks,
Mel
really?
Brooks, and I'm sure he was 19 years old. I mean, these were not famous, directors and actors at the time. I'm sure he was 19 or 20. Sammy Davis Jr. was an MOS 442. And by the way, I have a theory that I am not going to research because I do not want it to be disproven. But as you know, the American Army in World War II was segregated by race.
Yeah.
So the black soldiers were segregated and not allowed in white units. And yet Sammy Davis Jr. was a black man. And here he was in the Morale Corps platoon. So my theory, again, that I don't want to research, my theory is that Sammy Davis Jr. integrated the United States Army 4 years before Harry Truman did it in 1949. But
he probably did make big inroads. Because laughter and just being entertained really bridges all levels, all genres, all backgrounds. It's just translates across the demographic, basically.
Absolutely. And remember, these entertainers were coming to the frontline areas, so they were within sniper range, they were within artillery range. So these frontline combat soldiers that were living like that, 24/7 for weeks and weeks and months, really appreciated the fact that these guys were coming out there and it, that they weren't forgotten, that they were getting entertainment as well, because no USO show was going to come within 100 miles of, an active front. And they shouldn't have. And, by the way, the USO did brilliant work, but these entertainment soldiers were under orders and they had to go where they were ordered to, and they were ordered to do shows at the front line. So Mel Brooks, Sammy Davis Jr., Burt Lancaster, a pretty famous actor.
Yeah.
Red Skelton, who was a very famous comedian in the 50s and 60s. Burl Ives, Don Knotts.
Don Knotts too.
Yeah.
Really?
So these.
Oh, wow.
And other than Mickey Rooney, none of these men were famous. While they were in the war. They were just kids.
Well, Sammy was 18 is what I read. Sammy was 18 when he was in the entertainment troupe.
Yeah. Can you imagine that? 18 years old and well, as so many soldiers were.
Very young.
As so many soldiers were. So that was a very interesting group of soldiers. And by the way, the concept of the Jeep show was invented by a famous, at the time, Broadway director named Joshua Logan, who directed Annie Get Your Gun and Oklahoma and many, many huge Broadway hits. And he enlisted in the Army in World War II and was a captain in the Morale Corps. And these Morale Corps soldiers had come over in a big show called Hip Hooray. And they kind of thought that they would be doing this big show in Paris for the rest of the war, which would be outstanding duty.
Right. Yeah.
But Joshua Logan was like, saw the problem of the frontline combat soldiers so far ahead of their lines, and realized that they could provide entertainment. That his entertainment specialists were perfectly capable of getting in a Jeep and doing a show at the front line. So that's how. And as I said, because they were enlisted, they were under orders. And if they were ordered to drive to the German border and do a Jeep show, well, that's what they did.
Right. I mean, they had to go where they were ordered. And so it was Red Buttons too, right? He was one of the ones.
Yeah. Yes. I Red Buttons, I think, was an actor. I've certainly heard of him. But
Yeah, I think he was an actor and entertainer too. We got to take a quick break, but before we take the break,
Yeah.
I'm going to read the announcement real quick. There is a missing teenage girl that they're trying to find, and so I'm just going to read the announcement real quick. So on April 22nd, 2025, a 14-year-old girl, Olivia Hanson, remains missing in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She was last seen around 8:30 p.m. on Thursday, April 17th, near 88th Street in Vienna Avenue. Originally from Illinois, Olivia was in Milwaukee for treatment at Lad Lake St. Rose campus. Reports indicate she left the facility with another individual while that person returned. Olivia did not. Her family believes she was last seen at the Ambassador Hotel on Wisconsin Avenue that evening. Olivia is described as 5 foot 3 inches tall, weighing between 150 and 170, with brown hair and brown eyes. She was last seen wearing a black hoodie, black pants, and red tennis shoes. The Milwaukee Police Department does not currently consider her critically missing, but actively seeking information regarding her whereabouts. Fox 6 News Milwaukee. If you have any information that could assist in locating Olivia, please contact the Milwaukee Police Department at 414-935-7272. And we're going to take a quick break. We'll play Sweet Potato Pie, Stand Up.
Stand up for the red, white, and blue. Stand up for the values we hold true. With gratitude I'll stand as our flag begins to wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Stand up, put your hand on your heart. Stand up for the freedom it imparts. Bless all who stand for justice. Home of the brave and the land of the free. So I'll stand. So stand up for the red, white, and blue. Stand up for the values we hold true. With gratitude I'll sing as our anthem starts to play o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Stand for Senior Airman Holland Pickard.
Specialist 4th Class Robert Summey, U.S. Army. Staff Sergeant Jerry Altman, United States Air Force.
Second Lieutenant Zachary Stead, Air Force.
Military Broadcast Radio, the station that's giving veterans a voice.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Welcome back to the Tracer Rounds podcast, and I'm Terry, your host, and I have with me Robert O'Connor, and we're talking about his book, Cheap Show. And so we left off with the entertainers, and we left off with talking about the ones that were later famous. Some were famous while they were serving. Others weren't famous until they came back. So you were wanting to pick up the story there. What else did you have to tell us about that?
I wanted to talk about three things that that really caught my attention that I had not appreciated until I researched this book. We've already talked about the M1 Garand rifle and what an important weapon it was, but I became fascinated by the M1943 field jacket when you consider combat infantry. The field jacket, the field jacket the Army combat infantry wore was essentially a suitcase with sleeves, because you could tell a combat veteran because he did not have a knapsack. He did not have a gas mask or a gas mask holder, but there was 4 very large pockets on the field jacket, and you could tell all 4 pockets would be full of stuff. So, in one of the lower skirt pockets, there would be, 2 hand grenades, a toothbrush, and, letters from home. And in the other side pocket, there'd be, 2 K ration kits and, clips for his rifle. I just became absolutely fascinated with that piece of equipment because these combat soldiers, I learned, and this may be true to this day, just did not want to carry anything they didn't have to carry.
Yes, that's true.
So the field jacket provided a great benefit there. The last one is the M1 rocket launcher, which of course we know by the name bazooka. Mm-hmm. The M1 rocket launcher in training camp, the soldiers were, and if they saw the training films, they were led to believe that, this was a tank killer. It probably did stop a few tanks from time to time at great peril to the person, both the loader and the shooter of the bazooka. But as the character learns at Bastogne, if you're going to be shooting it at a tank, you probably want to be shooting it from inside a building at the side of a tank. And by the way, this awesome weapon was powered by 1 D-cell battery.
Wow.
That was in the stock. And fortunately, there was a replacement battery also in the stock. But it was a tricky weapon, and yet soldiers were using it under combat circumstances. So I'm full of respect. So those were three pieces of equipment, and of course the Jeep itself, which was a really superior quarter ton truck. Quarter ton refers to how much cargo it could carry. The United States made 600,000 Jeeps. Wow. During World War II. We gave a couple 100,000 to the Russians and maybe 100,000 to the Brits as well. But the Jeep was everywhere in the war.
Yeah. Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, if you watch episodes of MASH, you see how important it was.
Yes,
in that terrain as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeep has been important to Army operations for a long time, and now it's only in the 1990s is when we got the Hummer. Then it kind of replaced the Cut V, which was the GMC vehicle. And then we went to the Humvee. So yeah, Jeeps were important for quite several decades, I think, with the military, with the Army in general.
And by the way, you could get us after the war. You could get a surplus Jeep for about $1,000.
Wow.
That's So and the first people to buy them were farmers and miners mostly. It wasn't until the probably the mid '60s that Jeep started to become consumer vehicles.
Right. Well, one of our officers, he was a doctor in one of the units I belonged to, and he had bought in one of the surplus Jeeps, and he was all taken with the Jeep, and he put all the old stuff on it to make it period. So he really enjoyed that Jeep a lot.
Did he mount a machine gun? Did he get that off that?
I don't think he did.
Most of them did not have that. A lot of them in the European theater had a wire cutter, a vertical bar welded to the front of the Jeep to try to prevent wires strung across roads by German saboteurs. And
really?
so you see when you see a World War II Jeep, often that bar that's sticking up on the front of sticking to the front fender is intended to catch wires. And there probably were not many of those wires, but why take the chance?
We've gotten a lot of comments, and this one says my unit had to replace a bunch of parts on the 151 Jeeps just so they could be sent in to have the frames cut. We just got the Humvee.
Yeah, I'm sure there are Jeep Willies in service somewhere in the world. They really take the punishment, and they're very well. Your listener would know, but they're relatively simple for mechanics to keep in service, which is probably not the case with Humvees. No,
they're not. The air restrictors and everything that has to go along with them, and the glow plugs, and yeah. And then the differentials, how they, you can send all the power to one tire and all that. So if anything like that fails, it's a mess. Yeah. So a Jeep, simple Jeep.
It just went. Right. One of the things, if you think your audience would be interested, I mentioned that I created this character, the war correspondent, so he could explain things.
Yeah.
I had him write a column for his newspaper after the war, kind of looking back on the American Army and how unique it was, because I wanted to kind of discuss that with the readers. And if you don't mind, Terry, I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from his quote unquote column that he wrote, which, by the way, the editorial director would not run it because the war correspondent wasn't in the editorial department. But this is what I had him write. And of course, it's all factual. But the American Army was larger than the nation's other military services combined. Unlike the Navy and its Marine Corps, the Army had to rely on the draft to fill its ranks. If the other services were to some extent cherry-picked from American society, the Army was America itself, a cross-section of all the nation's geographic, religious, economic, and ethnic groups, including Catholics, Protestants, and Jews. The three fighting faiths in the service of victory invented the atom bomb and the idea of a Judeo-Christian nation. The Army drafted Americans from the economically backward South to the bustling cities of the Midwest, from the fisheries of Maine to the timber country of the Pacific Northwest, from Wyoming ranches to the garment factories of New York, from North Dakota wheat fields to the Mississippi cotton fields. The Army drafted PhDs. The Army drafted immigrants whom it taught to read and write the language of the country they served. It had to be this way, given the manpower needs to fight a world war on two fronts. It was also fitting, given the ideals America said it was fighting for. America fielded millions of citizen soldiers who disliked the goddamn Army, were ambivalent about their officers, and resisted the trappings of military hierarchy, also known as chicken shit. Yet many of them will remember their service as the ennobling experience of their lives. If you ask them, they will tell you they fought not for their country or for lofty ideals, but for each other, for their buddies, to get the job done and get home. That's the point I wanted people to remember. It makes me think about my dad. That's, he wanted to get home, and my uncle, he wanted to get home. And, the American Army in World War II I don't think we'll ever see anything like it again.
Probably not.
It forged a very common bond among, the 16 million, mostly men that served in the military. And then the, 40 million people that were their fathers and mothers or wives or children. And then, another 15 million or so people working in defense industries. I wish I could pull a switch and give us all the same kind of common experience, now we'd be a lot nicer to each other, and we'd also have so much more respect for our veterans, for our veterans, and we need to be nicer to each other, and we really need to treat our veterans with more respect than we do.
I think these days people are starting to see that, because the veterans coming back from Vietnam, they never were thanked.
Right.
They were never recognized
Right.
for their service. They
Right.
just were spit upon and
Right.
basically called all kinds of names. And so now those Vietnam veterans are now getting the recognition that they never got way back in the day, because every time I talk to one, they're saying, this is the first time I've ever really been thanked. Like I feel it now. I feel like my service was valuable, like I was doing what I was supposed to do. So, I think that tide is turning somewhat, especially for those that didn't, get recognized when they should have been.
Yeah. Thank heaven.
Right. Exactly. So where can we buy your book? Tell us a little bit. We just got about 4 minutes left. So I want to just make sure we get that information out there. And let people know where they can pick up a copy.
Yes, you're very kind. So the book is available as an audio book. If you want to listen to it while you put in your miles, the book is available as a printed book and, of course, as an ebook. It is on Amazon. Just enter Jeep Show Book in the search bar, or if you don't like Amazon, it is available at bookshop.org. I do want to mention I am giving $1 per copy sold to an organization called Shields and Stripes. Shields and Stripes is a startup that serves veterans and first responders. And as you know, Terry, there's a huge overlap on veterans and first responders. God bless them. It serves veterans and first responders who, with mental health and physical health services. I met them at a veterans meeting and really was impressed. I did tell them that I would give them all the profits from the sale of my book, but $1 per copy was way, way, way more money. So that's where you can get the book and help me and help me support Shields and Stripes. I am working on a sequel. My dad, who came from a blue-collar working class background, went to college on the GI Bill. The GI Bill changed American society for the better. Yes. I want to send my main character, who will be pretty old, I want to send him to college on the GI Bill so I can learn more about it and understand more of what it was like for my dad. And then there's the Korean War.
Yeah, there's more to write for sure.
And perhaps the main character will find his way to Japan or Korea at that point. I don't know. I'm still working out the main ideas, but the GI Bill for sure.
Yeah, that was a game changer for a lot of returning soldiers, because they didn't have any education. Some of them kind of left high school before they graduated. And so, they needed that in order to kind of get themselves on a good footing and progress. And civil service, too, had come into play, too, then, trying to get those soldiers hired and give them preference. And that's why there's still veterans preference today, is because some of that was happening. And I do have my copy. I ordered it from Amazon as well. And so I am currently reading it. And so I'm really excited to get more into the story after hearing you kind of relay some of the different parts. I'm excited to get to the next chapter.
That's Mickey Rooney on the cover, Terry, doing a Jeep show for, I think, the 445th.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there he is. And,
very cool.
And the soldiers listening are absolutely cracking up.
He was hilarious. He really was. I watched, the shows that were on about his comedy shows and whatnot, and they were just hilarious. He was just funny.
His career plummeted after the war, and I'm full of respect because he never stopped working. He never. So there was a time when he could all he could do was do like people would have cocktail parties and have Mickey Rooney come and entertain at their cocktail parties, and it was work, and he did it.
Right.
I'm full of admiration.
Well, Robert, I appreciate you coming on. It's been an honor to talk to you and to get to know a little bit more about your characters and then about the battle in general, just historically knowing a little bit more. And I love that you intertwine fact with fiction to kind of come up with a story that will resonate with people and that they'll be interested to read so that they'll understand what really transpired. So I really appreciate that. So we've got to sign off, but I just want to thank you again for being here. Maybe you'll come back when you've got your other book. We could talk
all night. That would be great for me. That would be great. Thank you so much, Terry. It's really a privilege to talk with you and your audience.
It's really definitely our pleasure. Well, this is Tracer Rounds signing off.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.